We bring two of history's most powerful minds face to face, Fyodor Dostoevsky and Friedrich Nietzsche. The debate begins with this question: if God does not exist, is everything permitted?
That sentence is mine. I gave it to my brother Ivan in a drawing room in a provincial Russian town, and a servant overheard it. The servant was Smerdyakov. By morning my father was dead. I want you to feel what I am saying. Ivan never raised his head. He spoke an idea aloud, to himself, to the air, to a man he did not respect, and the idea grew legs and walked into another man's mind, and that man took a copper paperweight and crushed an old fool's skull. By the end of the novel, Ivan was speaking to the devil at the foot of his bed and could no longer tell which of them was real. That is what your freedom produces. Not the Übermensch. A boy weeping at his father's grave who has finally understood that words are weapons, and someone else picked up his.
And there is the great Russian trick. You hand a brilliant young man the truth, and then you punish him for daring to say it aloud. Ivan was not destroyed by his idea. Ivan was destroyed by you. By an author too frightened of his own logic to let his hero stand on two legs. Of course you sent the devil to him. Of course you broke him into a fever. Because if Ivan had walked out of that drawing room intact, lucid, even useful to himself, your entire cathedral would have come down. So you whispered to your reader, "See what becomes of the man who thinks." It was not a novel. It was a sermon. And the sermon was, "Come back to your knees, little Russian, before you start to actually mean what you are saying."
I did not break Ivan. I watched him. I have been Ivan. I spent 4 years in a cell in Omsk, and I watched what men become when there is no judge above them, when the only God in the room is whichever prisoner is holding the longest knife. You read my books in a quiet German study. I wrote them in the wreckage. The man without God in my pages is not an invention. I shared his bread. I watched him laugh when a sick man died on the floor beside him. That is your blank canvas, Friedrich. That is what creation from nothing looks like when an actual human being tries it.
Then what you saw was weakness, not freedom. Your prisoner laughing at a corpse was not a creator of values. He was a slave whose master had vanished. He had absorbed centuries of Christian conditioning, and with the priest gone, he could only mimic the cruelty he had been taught to fear. That is not the death of God in any meaningful sense. That is a Christian without his Christ, which is a far more wretched creature than either a Christian or a man who never knelt at all. The horror you witnessed in Siberia is the horror of your civilization's failure, Fyodor, not the failure of mine. My Übermensch is not a man drained of God. He is a man who never needed him.
Then show me one. Walk through any street in Europe and find me one man, one woman, one child who has truly never needed him. I will show you 1,000 who pretend. I will show you the prisoner laughing at the corpse and the philosopher weeping on a horse's neck in Turin, and the bureaucrat at his desk signing the deportation orders without losing his appetite. Your Übermensch is a beautiful word. Beautiful words are cheap. The actual men who believed they had escaped the moral law, I knew them. They did not become creators. They became terribly small.
You speak as if the absence of greatness disproves the possibility of it. By that logic, no human virtue exists, because most men fall short of every virtue that has ever been named. The Übermensch is rare because rarity is the price of height. Your Christ was rare too, Fyodor, and look what the herd did to him. They nailed him up and made a religion out of his corpse, and now they hate every man who tries to climb the same hill without the cross.
A man you love has hurt a child. There is no afterlife, no record kept, no ultimate judgment. What stops your hand?
Stops it from doing what? Killing him? Forgiving him? The man who needs an afterlife in order not to butcher his neighbor is already a butcher. He is simply on a leash. I grant you that. That is the weak Christian, and I have written him on every page I ever wrote, and I have despised him there. But there is another Christian, the one for whom the eye of God has become his own eye. He does not refrain from cruelty because he fears punishment. He refrains because he can no longer look at cruelty without seeing himself in it. That is not a leash. That is a furnace.
A furnace that burns the man who lit it. Bravo. You have just described a self-made hell and recommended it as moral hygiene. No thank you, Fyodor. I would rather a man be coldly free than warmly imprisoned by a god he himself invented and now cannot stop hallucinating. The noble soul does not strike the child in the first place, not because he fears the lash, but because cruelty bores him. He has better things to make. You have built an entire civilization out of the assumption that men are dogs. Of course, your dogs run wild when the master dies. That is not an argument against the death of the master. That is an argument against the breeding.
Cruelty bores him. Friedrich, you wrote that with your own hand, and I want to know which one of us has actually met human beings. Cruelty does not bore the cruel. It thrills them. I watched a guard in Omsk slowly drown a kitten in front of 7 men because he was bored on a Tuesday afternoon. He was not a leashed Christian. He was a man, and men contain that. And the only thing I have ever seen pull a man back from that edge is the quiet horror of imagining himself caught in some ultimate gaze. Call it God. Call it the face of his mother. Call it the eye of the kitten. There must be a witness, Friedrich, or there is nothing.
Then call it the face of the kitten and stop dragging God into it. We are arguing now about the texture of conscience, not its existence. I never denied that men are restrained by something. I denied that the something is what you say it is. The Christian invents a heavenly father because he cannot bear to look the kitten in the eye himself. Too much is asked of him. So he outsources. He says, God sees, not me, so I do not have to. That is the most cunning evasion in your entire theology. You dress moral cowardice in cosmic robes and call it humility.
And the man who can look the kitten in the eye without flinching, without trembling, without meeting anything beyond himself, that man is rarer than your Übermensch and a great deal more dangerous, because he believes he has earned the right to decide which kittens live. I have met him too, Friedrich. He runs prisons. He runs them very efficiently.
Hannah Arendt sat at the trial of Adolf Eichmann and saw not a monster, but a banal bureaucrat who said he was just following orders. Stanley Milgram showed that 2/3 of ordinary people will electrocute a stranger if a man in a lab coat tells them to. What does this say about ordinary people without a transcendent law to refuse?
It says exactly what I have been telling you, and it took 2 centuries and a death camp to prove it. Strip a man of the conviction that there is something above the state, above the lab coat, above the orders, and he will electrocute his neighbor before lunch. He will sign the deportation papers and go home and play with his children. Eichmann was your Übermensch, Friedrich, in his actual historical form. A man who had stepped beyond good and evil. A man for whom the old morality was a weakness to be overcome. He overcame it. He overcame it 60,000 times a day at the train schedules.
No, you will not put Eichmann on me. Eichmann was the opposite of the Übermensch. Eichmann was the last man in his most refined form. A clerk, a herd animal so completely fused with his herd that he could no longer tell where his orders ended and his soul began. My Übermensch creates values. Eichmann received them and processed paperwork. Read the trial transcripts, Fyodor. The man could not finish a sentence without quoting a regulation. That is not a man who has overcome morality. That is a man who has been emptied of one and filled with another, and the new one happens to be administrative. My philosophy demands that the individual stand alone against the herd. Eichmann was the herd. You are blaming the wolf for what the sheep did when the shepherd left.
And yet the shepherd you killed was the only thing standing between your sheep and the slaughterhouse they walked into singing. You announced God's death to philosophers in a study. The announcement was heard by clerks. Clerks do not become Übermenschen. Clerks become Eichmanns. You have written a doctrine for 100 saints in a world of 100 million bureaucrats, and you cannot understand why the bureaucrats absorbed your aristocratic poetry and turned it into a filing system for corpses. That is the actual experiment your philosophy ran. The results came in.
And you know what came back to me, Fyodor? In the rare moments I am permitted to see what was done in my name. My own sister, Elizabeth, married an anti-Semite, founded a colony of them in Paraguay, and after I lost my mind, she edited my notebooks into a book I never wrote and handed it to men in black uniforms. The men in black uniforms thanked her. That is what was done with me, and I would still rather have written what I wrote than have written your books, because at least my philosophy could be misused by cowards. Yours produces cowards on purpose and calls them devout.
Friedrich, here finally we are speaking. You hate what was done with you. I hate what was done with my Christ. The Grand Inquisitor in my novel is the church that took Jesus and locked him in a cell. We are not arguing whether ideas get corrupted. We are arguing whether the original idea, when uncorrupted, holds a man's hand back from the child or pushes it forward. And I tell you, I have lived inside both. The cross, when it is real, holds the hand back. The will to power, when it is real, finds a reason to let it fall.
In Watchmen, Ozymandias decides that to save 1 billion people from nuclear war, he must murder 3 million in New York. Without God, is there a calculation that could justify this? Or is there a line no math can cross?
You phrase the question as if the calculation is the danger. The calculation is not the danger. It is the most honest part of the whole transaction. The danger is the man who cannot calculate, and so does nothing while the wave breaks over him. And here, Fyodor, is where your tradition fails most completely. Your Christian recoils from Ozymandias, refuses the math, washes his hands, and 3 weeks later, 1 billion people are ash. Then he goes to confession. Then he sleeps soundly. That is the moral worth of the line no math can cross. It is purchased with someone else's blood, in someone else's city, by someone the saint will never have to look in the face. I do not admire Ozymandias, but I admire him more than the saint who let him do it.
I have written this scene, Friedrich. I wrote it in the brothers Karamazov, in the chapter Ivan reads to Alyosha. Ivan tells of a child tortured to death by her parents. Then he asks, if the harmony of the entire universe required that one child's tear, would you accept the ticket? And Alyosha, gentle Alyosha who barely speaks, says no. He hands the ticket back. That is the line. Not because Alyosha cannot do the math, because he refuses to live in a world where the math is the final word. The moment you are willing to murder one innocent for 1 billion, you have agreed to murder 1 billion for 10 billion. And on it goes, and at the end of that road, there is a man at a desk in Berlin signing schedules. Ozymandias is Eichmann in a costume.
And Alyosha is a child holding a ticket, while the train leaves the station, with everyone he loves on it. Beautiful gesture. Useless. Your Alyosha is the moral equivalent of a man who refuses to push a drowning child, because pushing is an act of force. He has confused inaction with innocence. This is the rotten core of your morality. It congratulates itself on its clean hands, while the world burns through inaction it could have prevented. The man who flinches at the right moment kills more people than the man who acts. And your Christ never tells you this, because your Christ never had to govern anything.
My Christ governed Gethsemane. He chose freely to be killed rather than to kill. You call that inaction. I call it the only action that breaks the cycle your Ozymandias is trapped in. The Savior who murders 3 million has produced a temporary peace built on the only foundation peace cannot rest on, innocent blood. Within a generation, his children will be at war again, and the debt of New York will not have been a payment but a deposit. Your math forgets that the murdered have descendants, and the descendants remember.
And you forget that the saved have descendants too, Fyodor, and they go on living, and they build cities, and they make music. And your refusal to push the button has erased all of them in advance. You are the most beautiful coward in the history of letters. I mean that, truly. You write the most exquisite hesitation the human race has ever produced. And while you write, the world is governed by men who do not hesitate.
Looking back at your own lives, when did your philosophy fail you?
I was 27 years old, and I was tied to a post in Semyonovsky Square, and the soldiers had raised their rifles, and the priest had read the last rites, and I had perhaps 30 seconds left to live. They lowered the rifles. The Tsar had commuted the sentence. It was a staged execution, a piece of theater designed to break us. I survived, but the man who walked off that square was not the man tied to the post. Nothing I had read, nothing I had argued in cafes, nothing of my brilliant Petersburg atheism, none of it survived those 30 seconds. What survived was a feeling I cannot translate, a knowledge that I had been seen, not by the Tsar, by something else. I have been writing toward that feeling for 40 years, and I have never reached it. My philosophy did not fail me. My philosophy was born the moment my philosophy ran out.
And mine ended in a square too. Turin, January 1889. I saw a coachman whipping a horse, an old, exhausted, suffering animal, and something in me that had held for 44 years gave way. I ran across the square, and I threw my arms around the horse's neck, and I wept into its mane until they pulled me away. I did not speak again with full clarity for the 11 years that remained of my life. So you see, Fyodor, I do know what you mean by being seen. I was seen by a horse, and I would not trade that moment for the world, because it is the only time in my life I am certain I touched something that was not myself.
Friedrich, I am sorry. I did not know the story carried that weight when I mocked it earlier. Forgive me.
Do not be sorry. Be honest. We are both wrecked men, you and I, and we are both still arguing because the alternative is to admit the wreckage was for nothing. You lost a son, did you not? Alyosha. You named the Holy Brother in your novel after him.
Yes, he was 3. He died of a seizure, the same illness I carry, that I gave him, that I could not protect him from. I went to Uptina Pustin afterward to see the elder Ambrose, and what he said to me became Father Zosima in the book. Without that loss, there is no Karamazov. There is no Alyosha. The boy in the novel is the boy I could not save, walking in a world I built so he could finally live.
The greatest things any man writes are paid for in a currency he never wanted to spend. Your son, my horse. We are both standing in the same square, Fyodor. We just disagree about who is watching.
If you had 10 seconds with everyone hearing this conversation, every viewer, every reader of every comment thread, what would you tell them?
That the question we have been arguing is not whether God exists. It is whether you exist. Whether there is a self in you strong enough to bear what life is, with or without a heaven to make it bearable. If there is, you do not need my philosophy. If there is not, you cannot use it. Stop asking who is right between this Russian and me. Start asking what you would do tomorrow morning if you woke up and knew, finally and for certain, that no one was keeping score. The answer to that question is who you actually are. Everything else is decoration.
And I would tell them this, the man Friedrich just described, who wakes up tomorrow morning and knows no one is keeping score. I have written about him my entire life, and I have never once seen him become free. I have seen him become brilliant. I have seen him become powerful. I have seen him become useful. I have never seen him become free. Freedom is not the absence of a watcher. Freedom is the presence of a love so complete that the watcher no longer frightens you. You can call that love God, or you can call it the face of your child, or you can call it the kitten in the courtyard. But until you have it, you are not free of God. You are running from him. There is a difference.
A beautiful sentence, Fyodor. I would steal it if I could. But I cannot, because the love you describe is purchased, for most men, by a lie they tell themselves. And the lie is exactly the thing my work was meant to burn away. You and I want the same human being at the end. You think he comes through faith. I think he comes through fire. We will not know who was right, because neither of us will be alive to see him.
No, but he may read us. And if he does, Friedrich, I hope he does not have to choose between us. I hope he learns from your fire what cannot be saved by faith alone, and from my faith what cannot be built by fire alone. The man who can hold both of us at once. That is the man worth writing for.
Thank you.